Welcome to another episode of Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dion. Today, I am joined by Adam Fowler. Hey, Adam, how's it going?
Going well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm excited to have you on. I've been working with a lot of your stuff, and we had Kilo Loco on a few weeks ago talking about AWS and Amplify. So I'm glad to have somebody who's been working on the server side of AWS stuff and specifically your SOTO project. I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and introduce what SOTO is.
Okay, well, I'm Adam Fowler. For about 20 years, I was working in games development. And then about 5 years back, I decided it was too stressful. I decided I wanted to leave. I left, and then didn't touch a computer for about 2 years, and was basically a photographer for that period. During that period, I started making a couple of apps. I did make a couple of iOS apps, and that was my introduction to Swift. And at one point, I started to look at backup for images, and this is when I got involved in AWS and S3, their storage system.
Interesting.
At the time, I looked at when looking for like a Swift SDK for AWS. I thought that there must be one. No, there isn't an official one. But there was a community project which had been started, and I got that was what was called AWS SDK Swift at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I remember that.
And I got involved with it because there was some of it worked for me and some of it didn't, and I started fixing the bits that didn't. And slowly over time, I took over. I've been doing most of the maintenance on the project from that point on. The time I joined was just as it got sort of integrated with Swift Neo. That was work done by two guys called Joe Smith and Jonathan McAllister.
Okay.
And so since then, we've had the rename, we've had a major release, and a lot more people seem to be using it.
Yeah, it's an awesome project. I'm glad somebody's taken on moving to pure Swift when it comes to talking to AWS. What is something that an iOS developer should know about SOTO?
Well, first, primarily, SOTO has been designed for server-side Swift. The main thing is to support accessing AWS services through server-side, but it does work on iOS. You can use it on iOS. There's nothing stopping you using it on iOS. I guess if I was to do a project which was using AWS services, I would probably want to have a server-side component which was doing the access to those services. So you would probably want to be thinking about setting up server or Lambda access, and then talking to that server, which would then talk to AWS for you. So for iOS devs, it's available, and you can start using it now, even if it's just for uploading to S3.
My use case, funny enough, where I first got into SOTO was storing WAV files from the Apple Watch into S3. And it worked fantastically in order to do that. So it definitely works on the client side. But yeah, like the biggest use case obviously would be like, okay, you want to use it with Vapor, but like specifically AWS Lambda, if you need something to talk to Amazon Web Services, like SOTO is the way to go, more or less. What are some technologies? We talked about S3. Why would you look at something like using S3 with your server side or client side app, and what does it provide for developers?
Well, S3 is what S3 probably stores. I don't know how much percentage of the internet. If you need to serve images, or if you need to save data, it's one of the easiest app services out there to get into, and it's they have like various storage options for various pricing levels. I use it as I said, my first introduction to it was for backing up photos.
Right, right. Well, it's
I don't
funny
need,
because you're a photographer and you're like, I just need something to back up my photos.
yeah,
I'll write a
but
whole
like,
framework to do it.
yeah. Fair enough. That wasn't the plan. But like when I back up my photos, I don't need instant access to them. So you can with S3 they have various levels of storage. So you can have what's called Glacier, where like you pay a pittance,
yeah,
compared to what you would pay in S3. But
and as long as you don't need it right away, yeah, who cares?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's as long as you don't need it straight off, then like you can just store it in there. They even have like one which is even cheaper. I think I pay about 75 cents to store 3/4 of a terabyte or something.
Yeah, I get my $3 monthly bill from Amazon because I have some stuff in Glacier. Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Well, S3 obviously it has versioning, so if you're putting files up there, you can like version files. You can use it to serve a website off, of a static website. Or I have a number of websites, and I store the files for the websites on S3, and then they're served through CloudFront.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You were saying earlier how much of the internet is on S3, and it's like 80% of the internet is probably in WordPress, and all the image files are stored in S3. So yeah,
probably
like that is the biggest use case.
Most likely. And then like you put files on S3, or Amazon automatically back it up for you. If a drive fails, there's no worry about that, because they've got it backed up on at least 2 of availability zones. So you don't need to worry about backup because S3 is actually where people back up to.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be backing up the backup.
Right. Yeah. So S3 is a big one for file storage. What do you think are some advantages to using something like S3 for storing your files, as opposed to like, I don't know what the other one, like the only one I can think of is like iCloud or CloudKit on the Apple side, but like trying to think, what are the other file storage services out there? There's really, now that I think about it, there's not really a big one.
There are a number, but in the end, they all follow the same pattern as S3. The S3 have defined the interface.
Yeah.
And then everyone has S3 style storage systems. There will be different price differentials depending on who you work with. Sometimes I don't know anything about that. I don't know anything about that though. Like I wouldn't be able to compare prices.
So what are some other services that you've accessed through AWS?
So I guess the next one would be is a lot of people have. It's almost sticking on the S3 thing first. A lot of people make the mistake of using S3 to deliver files. It's not a cheap solution for content delivery. You should be using CloudFront, AWS CloudFront, for content delivery.
And that that's like provides like a CDN and a few other features there to make it like more applicable to serving files, right?
Yeah, so if you're like serving files for your app off the internet, you'd be wanting to use CloudFront. There's a couple of advantages. One is if you're using CloudFront, it's then it's stored on multiple sites across the world. So you're not going all the way to that server which is stored in Ireland. You can go to the one that's nearby, which is like in San Francisco or in wherever. And the second advantage of it is the price. You're like the amount of money you spend for serving a file from CloudFront is tiny compared to what you would serving on S3.
Like the closest competitor I can think to CloudFront would be like Cloudflare, really.
That's a similar.
Yeah, right. But essentially, it's like setting up headers and like doing all sorts of stuff that will make sure your data's cached and it's served fast. Yeah. Now, how does SOTO hook up to CloudFront? Like, what are some things that you've used SOTO and CloudFront with?
SOTO. I haven't used SOTO in relation to CloudFront really. That was more just like me using it as as a way to serve files. Well, SOTO will connect to every Amazon service there is, because the way it works is SOTO, we use the interface model files, which every SDK uses, and you then auto-generate all the code for every service from those model files. And so there is options to work with CloudFront from SOTO, but like it's not an option I would probably use that often.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to build a management tool, that would certainly make sense then.
Yeah. Oh yeah. If you.
So go ahead.
Well, I was going to other systems that probably would be of use to iOS developers. Obviously, Cognito. Cognito is like AWS is like identity and user solution.
Yep.
Cognito is kind of split into two sections. There's identity, where you use some form of you have someone provide saying this is so and so an identity, and then that can be used to create credentials to access Amazon Web services.
Okay.
And that's like Cognito identity. So that works with like signing with Apple, which is obviously very important for iOS.
Mm-hmm.
But it also works with Google, Facebook, and it also.
I looked at the Cognito stuff, and it's like massive what it provides as far as authentication is concerned. I could see how like Amplify is super helpful for folks on the iOS side when it comes to that stuff.
I think what Amplify does, which because you look at all the Amazon web services, it's really scary. There's so much.
Yes, it is.
There's so much, because they've tried to solve so many different solutions. They even have like different services which are almost doing the same thing.
Right.
But like they are serving a slightly different section of the market. So
like,
yes.
So I used Cognito. We had like set up a static like user essentially that would have access to more of the data on the server, and then I would need Cognito in order to access some of that data, and then it would just use that user authentication information to log that in and get that data. And I think most of that data was using Dynamo, which I believe is one of the other massive services that AWS uses. That's essentially like a database, and then we talked about this with Kilo, but like it's kind of like a document-based system with like kind of a JSON structure similar to Mongo, and SOTO obviously supports that as well.
Yeah, SOTO supports. Yeah, we'll support DynamoDB. There's DynamoDB is an interesting one to start. I wouldn't necessarily. I think Amplify produces a direct link into DynamoDB because they're trying to push DynamoDB, I think. But DynamoDB is actually quite. If you're not really experienced with databases, it's actually quite hard if you want to do anything complex.
Right.
It's because it's not a relational database.
Right. It's not. It's more like you said. It's it's key value. It's kind of a hybrid between key value and document based.
Yeah. It's like it's something. And then like trying to manage how you're going to do all your queries off that, and it is really quite hard, and you need to plan out beforehand what all your queries are, because that really impacts on the structure of your database.
Right.
Unlike in a relational database where you can just basically create everything and then go like, oh, I want that, and I'll join that, and
right.
And so it's a lot more complex. If you want to do something really simple, it's great, and it's fast, scales really easily,
and just like S3, it's cheap, which is a big advantage. Dynamo is like so much cheaper than is it Aurora that they run, where you can kind of
Aurora is their MySQL solution, isn't it?
Yeah, their MySQL clone, and it's a lot cheaper than that. Like I love relational databases, that's my bread and butter, but if you're doing something cheap like any of these like key value systems, document-based systems like Firebase or Dynamo are just so much cheaper. That's the big advantage.
But then these things are also like pay as you go as well. It's like how much you use it.
Yep.
Like with the relational databases, you're paying for a server almost.
Yeah. Yep. What other technologies did you want to mention that SOTO really specializes in?
I guess, yeah, the other one would be Lambda.
Okay. No, is there what? Because I've used the AWS Lambda stuff in Swift. How is SOTO integrated with that?
Well, if you're running a Lambda, there's a good chance you want to talk to an AWS service. And the current, I think that you can use there's the Amazon Smoke framework to do that, but like SOTO's, but also SOTO is available. SOTO is available for you so that you can communicate with like DynamoDB or RDS through your Lambda. You can I have had people invoking Lambdas from SOTO as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but I would say the standard path would be to set up an API gateway. API gateway is another service from Amazon where you can define APIs and then like push to different services from those APIs. Lambda being one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was my use case, was that we had set up a Lambda and then we used SOTO to talk to all the services through the Lambda. And basically, like you said, it's an API gateway, essentially. And it worked fantastically. One of the things was having to set up like what's called an AWS client. And you did some refactoring recently and how you did that with SOTO 5. What exactly is an AWS client? Why would you own? You're supposed to only create one of them, right?
Well, the AWS client basically, SOTO's kind of split into two parts. There's AWS client, which is it does all the communication with Amazon Web Services. It goes to find credentials that you can use to communicate with Amazon Web Services. It will generate your request, sign it, and then pass the response and pass that back to you as an object, a Swift object. The other half is the service objects, which are there's an object per service. So there's an S3 object, and these and there's a Cognito identity object. These basically give you the configuration to talk to each service, and then all of the different API calls that service has. The client it's best to keep one client, because when you set up a client, the first thing it does is it goes to find credentials. If you haven't given them directly to the client, it's probably going to go look in environment variables, check a file on your file system, then check to see if you're running on Linux. It will check to see if you're running on ECS or are you running on EC2. This is a long process.
Wow, I didn't know this. This is awesome. So you're figuring out where you're running, so that way it's optimized to call the services correctly. Okay.
You can reduce that. Basically, the client has a credential provider parameter, which you can say the default is to do all this big long chain.
Yep. Yeah, I now remember. It's like an enum essentially, or a series of static variables that you can like specify. Yeah. Oh, here's a username and password. Here, just use the built-in environment variables, etc. Okay.
Yeah, if you're running an iOS app, you really shouldn't be storing your credentials in the iOS app though.
Right. So speaking of credentials, what are some security gotchas that server-side or even iOS developers should know about when they're setting up and using AWS through SOTO?
Well, I guess the first one is related to your credentials. Basically, to communicate with AWS, you need two values. One is your access key, which is kind of a public key, and every request you send to Amazon Web Service, it's very visible. You can see this key, and then you'll have a a secret key, which is like your private key, funnily enough. This is used to sign the request. It basically collates the request with all the details of the request, and then like signs it using I can't remember offhand now. It'll be, I think it's used as the HMAC key in the signing process. If you leak both of those keys together, then anyone can access your AWS account with the permissions that those keys have. This is probably not something you want. So
no, I don't think so.
Do not store them in your executable. Do not store them in a config file.
Don't store it in your repo.
Yeah. So what ways to get around this? One of them is, don't talk to Amazon directly from your app, or if you are going to talk to Amazon directly from your app, get a server or a Lambda to sign those requests for you and send them back to you, so that then you can talk to AWS.
Okay.
So if you've got Lambda, then the key is only available. Your credentials are only available to that Lambda, and there's no way someone can access it unless they can actually get into your account. But if they're in your account, then you've already lost anyway.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So if you're, let's say, a project manager and you need to integrate AWS into your app, what would be your recommendation as far as how to go about doing that, and how to deal with either, Amplify or SOTO in that case?
I don't know a great deal about Amplify, so I can't really say with Amplify what would be the issues. It really depends on what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
If it is something simple, if you just need to upload files to S3, you could probably have a small Lambda that does this signing of your upload requests, and then do all the uploading from your iOS app.
Okay.
So you're saying send the request off to Lambda, it gives you a signed request, and then you can upload straight to S3. Obviously, if you're doing something a bit more complex, then you have to start setting up a pipeline for for either you're probably going to move a lot of it to a server or Lambda, and then you're going to have to set up a deployment pipeline where you'll need proper testing, and you'll need various environments to ensure you're not working on the production environment. You need the development environment, testing environment. So that's quite involved, and will probably take quite a bit of time. Another thing to be wary of is costs. Amazon are very good at surprising people.
Yes, that is true.
I'll just start up this server and then go home and forget about it, and then the next day you find you've got an extra.
You need to take out a mortgage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
You need to be on top of that just to be sure. Otherwise, there's a good chance you might get a surprise at some point later on.
So one thing a lot of iOS developers aren't aware of is the capabilities and power of Swift Neo. Do you think that there's a place for Swift Neo on the client? And what should iOS devs know about Swift Neo from that aspect?
Swift Neo does work on the client. They've put some work into making sure that it does. The raw Swift Neo you shouldn't be running on the client because it's a sockets-based solution, and you should be probably using network framework to doing your networking. Because if you just use a raw sockets one, it doesn't wake up the radio doesn't. The
cell
it doesn't
stuff.
Do all sorts of, there's all sorts of stuff you get for free through the network framework. Okay. So the Swift Neo guys did a second library which uses the network framework. It's called Swift Neo Transport Services.
Okay.
And there's that works great. And there's various applications various libraries that use it. So there's the async HTTP client, which is now using it. SOTO uses it. So if you're using SOTO, you are using the correct setup. There's MQTT libraries. It's quite low level, so there's a bit of a learning curve before you'll be writing your own servers, but it's worth looking into for sure.
So one of the frameworks that you've been working on and released recently was Hummingbird. Now that's like a server framework, like an abstraction layer, obviously above some of the low level stuff we've been talking about. What does Hummingbird bring to like the Swift server ecosystem that like other server frameworks, like, we're talking about Katura earlier, Vapor, Smoke, don't really provide?
Well, it's described as lightweight and flexible, I guess. Hummingbird is super flexible. You don't have to have everything. Something like Vapor, you start off with Vapor and you've got everything in there. It's all Vapor. So if you write a simple app which does like with Vapor, which just returns the hello or just an okay, it's about 3 times the size of a Hummingbird app.
Yeah,
because it has like SSL in there, it has HTTP2 in there. Which these are things you possibly don't need. Hummingbird's kind of set up to be as flexible as possible, so that like it's so it can be used in different situations. I've written a Lambda version of it, so you can run it on a Lambda.
Nice.
As well. So if you want some routing within your Lambda, there's a nice easy setup there. And if you're not sure if you want to run on server or Lambda, you can very quickly flip between the two.
Yeah, there's been some talk about folks wondering about, okay, should I run Vapor on a Lambda? And like you said, like that feels a little bit overdoing it, because there's a lot of stuff in Vapor. Like Vapor is fantastic, I love it, but like it provides an ORM, it provides all sorts of different ways of doing communication you just won't simply need when you're running a Lambda. So it's not really made for that. And it sounds like Hummingbird is really about simplicity and flexibility when it comes to that, and just providing the bare minimum that you need, right?
It's providing a bare minimum, but it's giving you the options to bring those things in if you need. So the HTTP2 is available. TLS is available, but like you don't pay for them if you don't want them.
Yeah, right. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we close out?
I guess given that this is probably primarily directed at iOS developers, there will be an iOS Hummingbird coming up very soon.
Okay, so you can run your own server on the iPhone.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, I don't know what the deal with the App Store would be, but it's still like for developers, that's fantastic.
I think I've seen people use it as a kind of a dummy server that they can test against while on their iPhone.
Yeah, that's actually a use case I've seen a lot, is where people need to do like unit testing and they need a dummy server. And they'll like set up Vapor, but this sounds like much more like what folks would be looking into if they want to set up a server to do testing on their iOS app. So that's fantastic. We'll definitely put a link in the show notes to that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
It's currently a pull request. It's not been merged in yet, but like it will be probably in the next few weeks.
I'm sure it'll be by the time we release this episode. So yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Well, Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you online?
They can find me online on Twitter as O_aberration. I have a website, opticalaberration.com. There's a photography thing going on there. And on GitHub, I'm Adam/Fowler.
And what's your Instagram? Come on, we need that one if you're a photographer.
It would be Adam Fowler Photo.
Awesome. And then SOTO Codes is the site for SOTO, so you'll definitely want to check that out.
Yeah.
We'll have links in the show notes as well. People can find me on Twitter at LeoGDN. My company is Bright Digit. Please take some time, provide a positive review if you can on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google, wherever you're listening. And if you have anything you want to come and talk about on the show, or you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. DM me on Twitter. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you next time. Bye.